predicated on you knowing what you want to do, and you're conducting it in a way that's legal, conducting it in a way that ascribes and conforms to the way that practices and policies and regulations need to be followed, and so that's a good thing. All these negative implications that we hear about robocalling are all driven by primarily illegal and unwanted robocalls. The real message that we want to share with you today, and I'd like to get across, is that whether you call it robocalling or something else, the commercial calling community that you all represent, you have to make sure your voices are heard to ensure that the solutions that are going to be created and are being created today are actually going to be implemented in a way that supports the business needs of this community. If your voices aren't heard, I can assure you that the solutions that are going to be developed are not going to address your particular constituency. And in fact, some out there are already characterizing communities like yours as the edge or the corner cases scenarios. They're using words that basically imply that you're not part of the core constituency that needs to be addressed in the solutions to this problem. The fact is, you are the core constituency. You are a critical part of that core constituency. And so your voices need to be heard. So how are the mechanisms that are being developed? How can PACE and its members be more actively involved in the solution space? You've heard a lot about stir and shaken. I'm a techie. Stir and shaken is nothing more than an attractive, sexy way for the techies to get into this whole game. Stir actually stands for Secure Telephone Integrity Revisited, which is basically just an undertaking that came out of the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. But it was basically an approach and a set of guidelines and standards which in reality is not implementable. The stir in itself is not implementable. What happened was a group called ADIS, which is the Alliance for Telecom Industry Solutions, took stir and together with the SIP Forum started to work on helping to make stir into a set of practices and policies and standards that are actually implementable, that will actually make its way into real life situations. And they came up with the acronym of SHAKEN, which stands for the Secure Handling of Asserted Information Using Tokens. Again, that's just an artificial way for the techie community to try to force fit some nice words into an appealing acronym. But stir and shaken, and there was a couple of questions on this earlier today. Stir and shaken are only a reference architecture, and they're only a standard that's being put in place in order to have call authentication standards be actually enforced and practiced in the industry. But it's only a standard. What's happening now is with the FCC and with ADIS and the SIP Forum and with other industry bodies coming into play, what we're trying to do now is make sure that we can move from taking that standard and getting it into a stage where the technology that's going to be provided to you by your equipment vendors, by the carriers and the service providers is actually going to be able to have this implemented so that you can make sure that whether you're on the originating side of a call or on the terminating side of a call, you can be assured that the phone number that's coming across is actually a phone number that you can trust. That's what this is all about. iconectiv as an industry player, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the interests and the needs and the points of view of the entire industry are going to be reflected in to the development of the stir-shaken framework. And how is that happening? It's happening through the standards bodies, like ADIS and the SIP Forum. It's happening through the FCC, which, as you've heard many times, has come out with notices of proposed rulemaking and notices of inquiry around technologies for caller authentication. But all of those constituencies are developing these guidelines and these practices as we speak. So it's very important for you as an industry body, I think, to make sure that your voices are heard, either through participating in those filings to the FCC or participating in the development of the standards as we move forward with the implementation of the Shaken framework. So just to get down to real basics, what is this all about? Jim Noble, I thought, again, did a very nice job characterizing this earlier. I'll just describe it once more for clarity from my point of view here. The whole idea is when there's a phone number that is used to make a call, you would like to make sure that that phone number is coming from who it says it is, and then that call, using that phone number, is transported over the originating provider's network, through the terminating provider's network, and then shows up on the recipient's device with either a smiley face or something like that that indicates that the call is a good call, or a sad face or something else to indicate that it's not a good call. And how that's done is essentially by using the Shaken framework to develop an ecosystem where there are only going to be certain people that are allowed to assert that a call is who it says it's from. And those parties are the service providers and maybe others that are going to be given tokens that essentially say, I can assert that a call is good or bad. And then only those companies that actually have a token will then be able to go to a certificate authority to get a certificate, which they attach to that token, to then transport the call to the recipient network. So there's a whole lot of processes and policies in place here to ensure that there's only certain people who are going to be able to verify or authenticate that a call is who it says it is, and to be able to ensure that as the call progresses through the network. All right, are there, let me just take a quick break. Are there any questions on how this all works at this stage?
From a timing standpoint, does it slow down the call as far as
No.
transmission times of a call?
The question is, from a implementation viewpoint, is there anything in this particular framework that's going to cause more latency or any delay in the actual time that it's going to take to actually deliver the call? The simple answer is there isn't supposed to be any. Having said that, I will tell you that this is all a work in progress. It is still a standard. For those of you that know about standards, there's only two things that you need to know about standards. One is the beauty of standards is there are many of them, so you can pick which one you want. The other thing about standards is they never get implemented quickly enough. The Shaken framework that we're all viewing as the silver bullet, and let me tell you up front, it's not the silver bullet, but we're viewing as a silver bullet to the problem, even now is going to take at least a year, if not more, in order to actually make its way through to a successful implementation. Okay? Another question here?
Here. Is there a feedback loop here? What if you got it wrong in the authentication and even the certificate? Is there a loop where the consumer feeds it back and it gets corrected?
Well, so this is all part of the work in progress, and these are all the scenarios that I think are very important to make sure get communicated to the people who are developing these standards and procedures. Rebecca Johnson on the previous panel is, as you know, putting together a coalition. They're going to be talking about it on Wednesday. It's important, I think, to make sure all these concerns get addressed, because the worst thing that can happen is that you assert that a number can be trusted, and it turns out that it's actually been used by somebody. That number has been used by somebody who you can't trust. And so the integrity of that number gets compromised, and if the integrity of that number gets compromised, the integrity of the whole framework gets compromised. And we're actually not back to where we are now, we're actually taking a step backwards because we've opened up the door now to more fraudsters coming up with even more innovative ways to perpetrate the bad things that we're trying to prevent today. So again, I want to make sure that the key message I'm trying to convey is make sure that this isn't just an activity about preventing the bad people from doing the bad things they're doing. It's also got to be about the good guys, the good businesses that you all represent, not being prevented from doing the things that you need to be doing as we move forward. The robocalling blocking and labeling is one aspect of that problem, But as we develop the implementation of the Shaken framework, it's going to be very important to make sure that there's nothing that gets put in place here that is actually a bad thing for the industry. Yes.
Okay, my question is with regards to also the length of the call. Under current framework, let's say my agent dials the number and it takes 5 seconds before he starts hearing a ring. Under this, will that start taking 10 or 15 seconds?
Again, the intent is that it should not make any difference. There are extensions, though, that need to be incorporated and technology changes that need to be made in order for this whole system to work. A lot of that technology is not in place today. Let me also make sure you all understand that this Shaken framework only works for calls transported over an IP network. All right, using the SIP protocol. So this isn't like all traditional telephony. This is in an IP context that all of this is going to work. So be aware of that. But the simple answer to your question is there should be no impact in the time that it takes to deliver a call.
Just as a matter of clarification, just a quick clarification point, the coalition that you referred to is the PACE coalition. Rebecca is our leader, but I want to make sure everybody knows that we are taking a very serious and strong leadership position in this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the clarification. All right, let me just go to the my last slide before I turn it over to Patrick. This is the rough timeline that we have in place now for the implementation of the Shaken framework. So earlier this year in January, the Shaken specification was actually formally approved and published by the ADIS SIP Forum IPNNI working group. That is now out there. It is available. If you haven't seen it yet, to be taken, to be commented, well, to be looked at, to be understood. Based on that, there's a governance model that was approved and voted on in June. And now, we're in Q3 now. What's happening now is best practices are being developed to be followed by clarification and confirmation of what the display framework is going to look like. How is, whether or not a call is trusted or not, how is that actually going to be displayed on a device to the end user who receives the call? That's still a work in progress. And then the operationalization, the metrics and the feedback as to how well this is working, those are all TBDs after this eventual implementation gets actually rolled out. So it is a work in progress. The best thing, though, about the fact that it is a work in progress is that there's continues to be an opportunity to make sure your individual concerns, scenarios, etc., are addressed. Okay, with that, let me turn it over to Patrick, and he'll tell you about the rest of what we have to offer.
So maybe before I do that, I'm going to do a little reverse Q&A. My turn to ask a question to you guys, right? Show of hands, who was here last year? Awesome, great. So there was a question that was posed to the audience last year on installation, deployment, et cetera, of a TCPA compliance solution, right? There was a pretty good percentage of the people in the room that had yet to deploy the solution. And maybe it's not necessarily just TCPA, but where are we at these days? Is there anybody in the room that has yet to deploy a solution? A year later, we have no hands. That's awesome. Excellent. Those of you that have deployed a solution, what challenges have you had? Finding a solution, meeting your needs, things like that. Anything that you can share?
Definitions.
Definitions? Definitions of?
What's an ATPS? What's storage capacity? What's interconnectivity? And who gets to make that definition?
Anybody else? Seems to be Q&A. All right. I wanted to touch a little bit on TCPA stuff. There we go. But that robocalling term, as we've all kind of acknowledged a couple times, just keeps coming, right? And similar position, right? I don't think robocalling necessarily is the problem. It's the technology being used by the bad guys that is the problem. Robocalling, auto dialing platforms, texting, things like that, it's all technology that really enables the businesses that we're all in today. It allows effective consumer engagement, allows us to reach out to customers and prospects, conduct our business every day. So, you know, I'm on that side of the ship as well. The robocalling itself is not the problem. I don't like that necessarily being a bad word. We do need to have things in place to be able to effectively conduct our business. We need to be able to have good campaigns in place to ensure that we provide value to our customers and prospects and so forth. We need opt-in data and records, solid records that we can keep track of. I think Michelle, you brought that, right? Keep those records, lock and key, critical to your business. And we really need more than necessarily just a TCPA compliance solution. I've kind of moved my train of thought from straight TCPA compliance to we need a way to make sure that we reach out to the right party, right? If TCPA magically disappeared tomorrow, we still need to make sure that we're reaching out to the right party each and every time. Protect our brands, make sure that we're delivering the right message to the right party, right? It isn't simple. It's a mess sometimes, right? Mostly around recycled numbers. And for every recycled number out there, you have an opportunity to have 2 misses, right? You have a text message maybe that has to go out to a subscriber someplace, and that subscriber's recycled their number. So your message now gets delivered to somebody who doesn't want that message or didn't want that message. And the person who signed up for that message isn't getting it, right? Or that call. So 2 parties in the end are being impacted by it. You have issues with the new person not getting consent, and then the whole TCPA flag thing goes off. Really creates a lot of situations and problems and lawsuits, unfortunately. It's a minefield. It's a real situation out there, and I guess what I was kind of hoping to hear from you guys is what you come across in selecting a solution. In the RPB space, there's a number of things that I've heard from customers, prospects in this space, things that they're looking for, and I wanted to give you a list of what I've seen. The models for a system or a solution need to be able to meet your needs more so than the other way around, right? You may have occasional contact with your customers, and you may just have to provide a list that needs to be scrubbed. And maybe a single TN gets scrubbed once a year, twice a year. But maybe you have really frequent contacts with your customers, or certain customers, and you want not necessarily to keep throwing those numbers into a scrubbing engine and receive data back. You want to provide those numbers into an engine that will monitor and just set off flares to let you know if something's happened with individual subscribers, if their status has changed, things like that, right? So you probably want scrubbing and monitoring capabilities, not just one. Some of you may have large volumes of data that you want to throw over the wall and have those lists scrubbed. Or maybe you want to have a contact center platform connected to the right party verification system over an API. You want near real-time transactions instead of having them handled via batch, right? Quick processing. Some frustrations that I've heard are, we send a query in and the response may come back seconds later. Or if I'm providing a file, it may be a day before I get those results back so that I can import them into my business processing system. Customers, right? If you're in the financial space, data involving PII can be very, very sensitive, right? So providing input to a right party system or TCPA system that might include PII, like a name and address and things like that, and doing matching based on that type of data can be very sensitive at times. So working with an RPB or a TCPA compliance solution that doesn't require that sometimes it's something that's needed, and has been a frustration that we've heard. There are lots of solution providers in this space. Some very good companies, good solutions, good reputations in those companies, and some that are Joe's TCPA scrubservice.com type of solutions, right? If you eventually wind up sitting in court, you want a solution provider that will stand behind you, will stand with you, that has a reputation in the industry to make sure that you have a strong solution. The types of answers, I think, to a TCPA or right party query is also something that's important. Some solutions will provide a probabilistic answer. This is an 80% match to what you're looking for, a 70% chance. And I don't know what that threshold necessarily is for your business, but deterministic answers are far better in my own opinion. So is this